I've got a question for you, for both of you. I don't know if you run into this or not, but we were kind of talking about this on one of my team calls today. You have practices that are very compliant, practices that take your recommendations and suggestions, they put them in place, they carry forward. They're huge fans and advocates of Fortune, and on and on and on. And then you've got practices that are not so much, that they find an excuse for everything. They find a reason why this won't work or that won't work. You know, they're in the doctor's ear constantly about, why are we doing the coaching thing? What is this for? Why do we have to do this? You know, it makes the doctor's role a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
And part of me, and I try to, not being critical at all, I try to look at it from both angles, because there are certainly some practices that are much easier to work with than others, that they just seem to grasp, you know, the concepts, specifically the concept of being proactive versus reactive. They really grab onto that. Some practices are much more, do a much better job of implementing the communication tools, and they see the impact of them. And they see the results from them. And all. I mean, they subscribe to Fortune, right?
Right.
And then you've got the ones that don't so much. I was talking to one of my clients about this, because she's kind of running into this with her team. Her team's giving her a little bit of pushback. And it's nothing I haven't experienced before. And the easy thing for me to do is just say, oh, well, you just got the wrong people, right? Like you're just coachable people. That's easy. But the answer is no, that's not true necessarily. Could be, but not necessarily. The answer really, I think, is maybe you're just better at connecting with some people than you are others. And maybe this particular team, you haven't done a very good job of connecting with. Right? Like if the meaning of communication is the response that we get, and the response we get is that this team hasn't subscribed. Right? Like I'm struggling with how to connect with that audience. You know what I mean? Because that's part of our responsibility. Like how do you connect? How do you connect with that audience? Because it's hard for me. Mentally, it's hard. And one of the comments that she made, and I hear this, I've heard this in other offices as well, is that a lot of the conversations that we have seem to, and I don't mean this in a derogatory sense whatsoever, but some of the conversations kind of go over their head, and they're a little bit higher level. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect, and some of the questions are very robust, and from a business owner's perspective, like they get it, like it makes sense. I understand. I know exactly what you're looking for when you ask that question. Whereas not everybody is going to that. Those kinds of questions aren't necessarily going to resonate with everyone.
So I have a lot of thoughts on that, but before I jump in, Jocelyn, do you? Because I've got like 100 thoughts on that.
No, you go ahead.
So I think there's so many components of that, John. First of all, I think part of it is the doctor's willingness and ability to coach when we're not present. So their level of the team's receptiveness, their ability to translate it almost into the day-to-day, that falls on the doctor. So if the doctor is not able to do that, and is not able to apply it and actually become a coach in real life, then it is a natural disconnect for the team, because the team is going to stay in that safe place of what they know and operate under what they know. So the critical component for us, I think, is to be able to coach the doctor, to coach them to implement on a day-to-day basis. I think also another thought that I have is some people, there's two sides of it, right? One, you can have a team that is just dug into the status quo and is so uncomfortable making any change that they will either ignore, sabotage, undermine, or show ignorance in order not to do it. Right? You know, I mean, they'll play all that. The other thing too, and this is such a touchier concept, is that I have had clients who, whether it's from a place of awareness or not, the doctor actually is resistant to showing up differently and would rather be surrounded by dysfunction, so there's somebody to blame, than to step outside their comfort zone and truly adopt the concepts or principles that we're trying to share with them and what they've hired us for. And at the core, it's with communication that they're refusing to make the shift, and with themselves, with themselves saying, I'm ready to get uncomfortable. I'm willing to have hard conversations, whether with the client or with the client or with my team. I'm willing to challenge myself to think differently about my limiting beliefs, my belief structure, my knowledge, skills, ability, bandwidth, all of that. And those are just a couple of the thoughts. But at the end of the day, I mean, yeah, we can change and should change our approach based on the team. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the doctor.
Mm-hmm. I like that you looked at it that way, Jon, because, we talk about when we get up there to when we do the camps and things like that, that we're there for them. It doesn't matter how we feel or what we're doing, but when we get up there, we want to be there for them. And the fact that you're looking at it in those terms, I think that helps tremendously. But what Carrie was saying about the comfort zone, that's just genius. Maybe it's taking, what was I reading? I was listening to the Fred's Super Bowl today. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about, when you learn to do things, you learn at a very slow pace. And sometimes you have to go back to the beginning if you're just not getting it. So maybe it's just getting down to the nuts and bolts of communication and the comfort zone and the limiting beliefs and stepping outside of that. But I totally agree with Carrie about the doctor thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like Simon Sinek says, it's always the leader. And so as coaches, we're certainly in leadership roles. I mean, we're recruited in the absence of leadership to provide leadership and develop leadership. Right. And so I do believe that regardless of the result that shows up, or at least the kind of leader that I want to be, is if things are going really good, I want to give that credit away. Like, right. If your practice doubled 6 months, that I didn't do that. Right. Like, that you put in the work, you were in there, every day, 6 days, 16 days a month, 4 days a week, 8 hours a day, et cetera. Like, you did the work to take that practice from point A to point B. Right. But if things aren't going very well, you've got to be the person that takes responsibility for that. So you know what I mean?
Totally.
And so you mentioned something. I'm trying to reach back to one of the comments that you made. What was it? It was so precise what you said right before Jocelyn commented. Shoot. It wasn't about comfort zone.
The limiting beliefs?
No, it wasn't about limiting beliefs. But it was one of the things that I recognized as well. I totally agree that that when we're there, you've got one kind of an energy present. And then when we leave, somebody has to be the person that carries that energy forward.
Right.
There has to be someone in the practice that's going to take a stand and say, look, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't happen, then I think it makes it almost not necessarily a possibility, but more so a probability that we're going to immediately start to retract.
So I've been, when you say about, so to your point, when you say about being, accountable to that, for the practices that I have that flounder, right, that they really struggle to implement.
Mm-hmm.
When I go back and I autopsy that, right, and I cut it open and I get into the gook of it, what I realize is that my ability to influence the doctor to be a good coach, my
Mm-hmm.
ability to influence the doctor to really ask good, powerful coaching questions, and their receptivity to that approach is or will define how successful they get. And I would take that back, honestly, where I learned that lesson, John, was, and you probably don't even remember the conversation, but I remember the very first conversation when we were co-coaching Dr. Warner and you took her through the correction format.
Mm-hmm.
And you took her through it, as a questioning concept. And that's really what that experience drilled that home to me. So when I go back and autopsy where I've been successful or where I haven't, specifically where I haven't, because I'm that personality that will just shred when I'm not successful, I found that it is my ability or inability to get that doctor to buy into becoming a coach rather than just a boss that will determine how successfully they're able to truly implement, and their teams to truly have accountability for the strategies, the methodologies, the systems, everything. And that means that sometimes we have to have some really uncomfortable coaching conversations and be willing to honestly risk the relationship sometimes with the doctor.
Yeah.
Because if they're dug in, it is important to hold a mirror up to that and say, how comfortable are you having this conversation or that conversation or doing this or that?
Mm-hmm.
How regularly do you do X? Some of those things. And if you were to do that, what difference would you expect to see out of your team so that they have a vision of what good would look like? And it's their vision, not ours,
Yeah. I think we have, I can't say we, I don't want to drag you guys into my mess, but it's one of the things that I have a tendency, and I guess this is a personal growth on my part, because I was very, very hyper aware of my weaknesses and when I made mistakes, like hyper aware to the point where I was not negligent, but I was very resistant to even make decisions and even take actions, because I just fear of failure, fear of making mistake, fear of judgment, criticism. Right. And so I overcame that. I worked very hard on that and I overcame that. Now I'm very decisive. And I take action very quickly. I'm very task driven, very task oriented, very decisive, very moving toward. I don't hesitate. I have a series of questions I ask myself before I make a decision, then I just pull the trigger. But what I've noticed is as I've strengthened that muscle over the years, my sensitivity to my weaknesses has decreased. So it's not I wouldn't say it's maybe it is a false sense of confidence. Maybe that is what it is. But I've just kind of, it's almost as if where I used to be blind to where I used to be blind to my strengths and hyper aware of my weaknesses, I'm more aware of my strengths now and less aware of my weaknesses. And so getting And so I want to, that's one of the things that I really want to focus on this year, just in my own development is, where are the areas that I need to refine in my approach? So if there are team members that I'm not connecting with, rather than just washing my hands and saying, well, they're just not coachable, let's just move on without them. Maybe some you need to move on without. But I think I would say 80% of those people probably have a lot of potential if you can just figure out how to connect with them. That movie, I don't know if you've seen Remember the Titans, but fantastic movie. I watch little clips of it on YouTube all the time when I'm doing cardio. And Red, the guy that Gary wound up having cut from the team, like that's the 10 or 20% that you're just never going to get through to, and that you're ultimately going to have to cut them loose, right? But there are a bunch of people like Gary in the beginning who was not subscribed whatsoever, had no intention of subscribing, was very resistant, and then after a short period of time before camp was over, man, he's 100% on board. So it's like taking your biggest critics and turning them into your biggest fans. Like that's an impressive thing to do. People that can do that. And I don't know that I have that.
I love that. I love people that are like, prove it to me. That are like, prove it to me.
You're breaking up pretty bad, Carrie.
We lost her.
Oh, she fell off completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's different levels of that. And you obviously have a level of that because just when we were at that Patterson branch and you were doing the PPO seminar, mm-hmm. Those reps are a bit unmovable, mm-hmm. and you moved them. So I think that you definitely have an element of the charisma that you need to get to that point, but there's a lot of factors involved with that, like time and getting to know the certain team members that are giving you a hard time and that sort of thing.
That stuff, I mean, talking about insurance management and business systems and scheduling and reactivation and sourcing accountability, that stuff is so easy. I mean, that stuff is so easy. That's why there are consultants everywhere. You know what I mean? And no offense, no criticism, no judgment whatsoever. If you can make a living doing it, make a living doing it. There are business systems people and there are people. And I mean, if I'm being honest, historically, my strength has been business systems, numbers, statistics, information, that kind of stuff. Like my personality style is just not geared to developing and building relationships and influence. That's never really been my strength, if that makes sense. And fortunately, what I do with Fortune, I'm very passionate about and I'm very interested in. So I can talk about it in a way that's charismatic and passionate and high energy. And that like interests people, like it's entertaining, right? Because I see this person with a lot of energy, but that shouldn't be confused with my ability to connect with people. There's a difference. That's one of the things that I'm learning. So I'm like, because maybe it was a false sense of confidence. I was like, there's a difference. I mean, to truly be able to connect, like for example, I did an event in Atlanta. I think it was Camp Communication in Atlanta, not too long ago, back in like November. It's the first one we did. And there was a young lady in the audience that came up to me every break. She like came straight to me. At lunch, she came straight to me. After it was over, she came straight to me. And she just was like overwhelmingly ecstatic and just complimentary. And like, she was all in, 100% subscribed, full on, just, I mean, subscribed. And it's the question that begs to be asked in my mind is, how do you get that response out of every person in the room? You know what I mean? Like, there has to be something, just the recipe for that result. Like, let's say you're baking a cake, right? And that's the cake that I want, is that response from everyone in the room. Well, people are different. They're individuals. And so the recipe for each person is different.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
We use the disc profile.
Yeah. And it just so happened that on that day, at that time, with the event, with the content of the event that we're covering, that the recipe just magically lined up, like the stars were just aligned, right? Just by default, not intentional on my part. It wasn't wasn't strategic by any stretch. You know, it was just, here you go. Let's throw it on the wall and see if it sticks. Just like the 99% of the doctors out there when they present a treatment plan, just like 99% of the hygienists out there when they present perio or fluoride or oral cancer screening. You follow what I'm saying?
But what do we say to our, what do we say? Totally. But we say this to our clients. You have to be in deep rapport, right? Number one step, right? You got to be in deep rapport. So when we have those select few that are deeply disengaged or highly skeptical or resistant, we would tell our clients, all right, you have to take those extra steps to get into deeper rapport. You got to get clear on what their rules and values are. The challenge is finding the time to do it at the degree that it needs to be done, especially as we carry a bigger and bigger caseload. But honestly, there are the people that are going to be wowed when you're standing in front of the room and they've got the energy and they bought in, those eyes, to Jocelyn's point, the deep eye, I'm like, yeah. But what about those heavy analytical or heavy task-oriented people that aren't going to buy into that personal, emotional energy that you're exhibiting? Well, on that end, that's our responsibility to get in there and figure out, okay, what are their rules and values? How do I honor that and appeal to that logic? And that's that one-on-one engagement.
Yeah. That's hard, man. That is not easy at all.
That's why not everybody can do what we do.
Yeah. That is so hard. And I don't think, we say not everybody can do what we do, but I don't know that there's that many of us that do that very well. You know what I mean? I would say that there's like the top tier, because that is so complex. Like, there's nothing simple about that at all.
No.
That is so complex.
Absolutely.
Totally true. But if we're going to, what do we do to learn that, right? So like, I spend at least probably most of my time, my self-development time is spent two places, right? Reading books and watching really phenomenal coaches coach. So how do they do it? And right, the internet is loaded with it. You can watch Mel Robbins, who's essentially coaching everybody when she gets on there. Tony Robbins, Dean Graziosi, or whatever. I watch Jay Shetty, because all of these people have different modalities of the way they coach, right? There's so many people that I watch, and I say to myself, okay, what are they doing? And I even watch people that don't appeal to me as a coach, right? So like people I wouldn't necessarily hire, because I know that they're going to appeal to somebody, and I need to know what they do that does that. What do they do?
Yeah.
And so, how do we constantly refine who we are so that we can connect with multiple rules and values and frameworks?
That's another thing that I've learned about myself, and I don't like this. And I just recently discovered this. If he poops in the floor, I'm gonna kill him.
He's really cute.
Just took him out.
Oh,
I'll take him outside. We'll go outside and I will stand out there with him literally for 20 minutes and he'll smell grass and he'll stand there. Sometimes he'll sit down while we're outside. And then I'm like, okay, apparently he doesn't need to do anything. So I'll bring him back inside. 10 minutes later, he poops on the floor. I'm like,
because you wanted him to poop on your schedule, not on his.
Drives me nuts. And
that's a metaphor, John. That's a metaphor for what we're talking about right now. Here's your metaphor.
Right. He sits down like a 80-year-old man, like sits down Indian style, you know.
Oh, such a sweetie.
But one thing I recognized about myself recently that I don't like, and so I want you to help me fix this, is I hope it's not attitude, but I want to be realistic with myself at the same time, because I'm just as guilty of not being the best version of myself 100% of the time as anybody. Right. But occasionally, like if it's almost as if I'm in conversation with someone or I'm coaching someone and trying to get a result out of someone. And based on their behavior or their responses, it's like there's a switch that I flip that says, okay, not coachable. And then and I don't do it consciously. It like happens subconsciously. But once that button's been pushed, it's like I think my communication towards that individual shifts. And it's kind of like, now I'm frustrated with you, right? There's no more compassion. There's no more empathy. It's like, and I'm pissed, because you're now an obstacle that's in my way to get where we're trying to go. Right. And so I just want to run over you. And that's never going to work. That's never going to work.
So, how you were saying, you and Reagan both say it, how you miss the times that you would go in and get objections from doctors.
Uh-huh.
Well, I think that's where you can shift your objection skills to.
Totally agree. And I made that distinction a while back too, because that's not the only time that you get to practice overcoming objections. Like if we're talking about, recording your follow-ups in dental intel and they're like, well, I don't have time for that. Objection.
Right.
Right. Or why do we have to do that? Objection. That's an opportunity to practice that. And so I started doing that a while back, and it's not as easy as you think. Like I think those objections are harder to overcome than a doctor's objection to coaching.
For me, the hardest objection is when the team is like, I'm going to wait for the doctor to change. The doctor's like, I'm going to wait for the team to change.
Oh, yeah.
And when you got that blame finger pointing, I'll change when they change, or I'll change, that kind of back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it's, because if you have a couple that are buying in, where you've got a foothold. But
mm-hmm.
when you've got that, finger pointing going on and you don't have a foothold, it's very hard as a coach to stay engaged long term, such that you can chip away one at a time, right? Because that whole blame game, and I've had more than a couple practices that love it. I mean, they live in it. They're like bathing in it, loving it, drinking it. They're all in that Kool-Aid. And I'm like, what are you paying me? In my head, I'm kind of like, what are you paying for? You want to live like this. You love being unhappy. And that's when I guess our bigger mission has to come into play, and, keep trying is where I go back to until they give up,
Yeah. Well, a few things have to exist in order for anything to change. A few things have to exist. A, they have to be aware that something needs to change. B, they have they have to accept responsibility for changing it. I was going to say there's three things, but I can summarize B and C into B. I mean, they have to own it. They have to accept responsibility for changing it.
And I find myself asking doctors.
The third one is they have to want to change it. I knew there was another one. So they have to.
Yeah, they have to want to do the work.
Yeah, they have to recognize something needs to change. They have to acknowledge and recognize it's their responsibility to change it, and they have to have the desire to change it. If any of those three variables is missing, nothing's going to change.
Right. And you would think that if they hire us, they have the desire to change, at least the doctor.
I know
that's not always the case. I'm just saying.
Right. I've had quite a few that want to just, they're really looking for somebody to blame, or they're looking for somebody to do the work for them. Like they really do think that there's like this magic pill. But I think that more often than not, in my initial conversation with you, doctor, want to change? Because if you don't want to change, we're going to end up with the exact same result that you've gotten already.
Mm-hmm.
And then they look at me, or I'll say, "Are you coachable?" And they're like, "Well, I'd like to think so." I'm like, "No, I'm being completely serious. Do you want to change, and are you coachable? Or do you just know everything that needs to be known about this?" And they look at me sometimes like, "I don't even understand why you're asking that. I called you." And I'm very nice about it. But at the end of the day, that's your first clue as a coach, whether they're coachable. Mm-hmm. Whether they'll take a minute to go introspective and say, "Am I really, or am I just looking for the easy button here?"
And that's great that you do that pre-frame. Are you coachable? Do you really want to change? We teach our doctors, we coach our doctors how to choose their patients, how to bring the patients in that they want coming into their practice. And sometimes we kind of need to do that as coaches too, I think.
And, you're absolutely right. You don't have to ask every doctor. I mean, some doctors, you can totally tell from your conversation. They're like, "I'm ready to change. I'll do anything. What do I need to do? Tell me, whatever." Right. You can see those. But there are some that they want everything different, but they don't necessarily think that starts with them. And that's about us asking really powerful questions and uncovering the true dynamic of what's going on there. And then, to your point, John, what's worse for me is that I'll go in. If they say yes, I'll go in even when I flat out know that they don't want to do it. Because then I get into that whole "I can save the world" thing, and part of my personality that I got to work on. Because you flat out know. Yeah. Then when it all goes, like it's south or whatever, then I'm like, I get into that whole, let me just autopsy that to death ad nauseum for 6 months. And it's ridiculous. Like, cut, Carrie, push the easy button. You know where this was going to go. So.
Hey, the interesting thing too is this particular office is like going gangbusters. Like I see little red, like I'm hyper aware of the little red flags. Like if you remember Patrick Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of Team.
Love that book so much.
Yeah. And so it's like if there's a lack of contribution or participation during a team meeting or during a consult, then that means there's a lack of trust. There's a lack of accountability. We're not focusing on results. We don't want to talk about numbers. And then you get the whole, I remember what it was earlier. I couldn't remember. You get the whole, like, they hear what they want to hear. They don't hear what they don't. Like you can present BAM and bonus or scheduling to goal thoroughly and with as much detail and enthusiasm, as absolutely possible. And if they don't want to hear it, then they're not going to understand it. If they don't want to understand it, they're not going to understand it. Right? Like I had another client.
Absolutely.
I had another client who I presented BAM and bonus to for probably the 5th or 6th time. I've been with her for several years, and I presented it. She's heard it in the training university. And then I was presenting it in office or reviewing it in office during AP. And she was like, you know what? I've heard you go through that probably 8 or 9 times. And she says, that's the first time I actually got it. She says, I totally understand it now. I was like, what'd you do the first 7 or 8 times? What were you doing during those conversations?
Yeah. Rejecting their possibility.
Yeah. And so it's interesting. I mean, the role that we're in is very interesting. It's not as you wish it was easy. You wish it was just straightforward. Like and this is, I think, why so many people want to, where's he at? Oh, he's at my feet. I think this is why so many people want to, get into this line of work, because they may see some successful people, some people that have achieved quote unquote success in a coaching role or a consulting role. And on the surface, it looks fairly easy. Okay, well, I know how to talk about this, and I know how to talk about that, and I know
you can just tell people what to do all day.
Yeah, but your value as a coach is your value as a coach is not in what you know. Your value as a coach is what you can implement, what you can get in place. You might know it all. You might know it all, but if you can't get it in place, if you can't get them to apply it, then nothing changes. And this particular office is like going gangbusters, like from like 40, 50% growth. You know what I mean? So it's easy for us on our end to see that kind of result and just say, nothing to talk about there. They're crushing it. They're killing it. Everything's going great, and completely ignore the red flags that say, no, there is a lack of trust. There's a lack of communication going on here. There are some cultural deficiencies that if go unacknowledged and addressed, will metastasize into something that will completely eliminate that growth.
It's not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that always gets me when people say, I want to be a coach, and I'll ask them, why do you think that'll work for you? And they said, well, I'm really good at giving advice. And I'm like, that's the number one thing coaches should not do. And they look at me, they're like, what? And I'm like, that's not what we do. Mm. And they're like, no, I'm pretty sure. I'm like, I can guarantee that that's a short road.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like, to your point, John, when you were saying about getting things implemented, so often it's almost like it has to be their idea, right? So we present ideas, strategies, concepts, then we have to unpack why they're resistant, or we unpack why they're struggling to implement. And then we have to uncover, well, what would need to change in order for this to work for you, or something like this, or what needs to happen. We have to ask so many questions that I really think that the true strength in a good coach is always asking really good questions. And I mean, a lot of our job.
How do you do that in a way? How do you do that in a way that does not come across condescending?
So,
because I've gotten that feedback too, and I've had to go in and make quality responses and say, listen, that's not who I am. That's not where I was coming from. And I was just asking accountability questions. Did we agree to this? Yes or no? Did we commit to this? Yes or no? What progress have we made? Okay, none. Okay, so
leading the witness.
Yeah, were we accountable? So no, back up. Say that again. So I'm wrong there.
You're leading the witness. So were you coming from a place of deep curiosity, or were you leading them to where you wanted to get them?
What an asshole.
Because the deep question.
Me, not you. Me. Like, wow, that hadn't even occurred to me. I'm leading the witness. That's never even occurred to me. But yeah, I can. Oh, no. Now I know why Brittany gets so irritated with me.
So one of the things that I learned I had just asked the team, I said, why is it that you guys would prefer to stay where you're at today than make any of these moves towards the things we've discussed? And I'm deeply curious because I'm investing a ton, right? This team. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, what the heck? You guys are all miserable. I mean, it's misery. And yet they'll stay there. But my curiosity is really, why is it better to stay where you're at, stay stuck and dug in, than try anything new? And the thing about the question is that I have to accept is they may not answer. They may not even know. But the gift I'm giving as a coach is I'm asking something that hopefully they'll come back to. Hopefully they will think about. And honestly, there's been 2 times specifically when somebody said, the questions you asked me pissed me off. And that was my moment of triumph right there. I'm like, good, I did my job. I made it so uncomfortable that you had to either accept that you would rather sit where you are or make a change. That's my job. And that was, I think, one of the biggest milestones for me when, as a coach, I was willing to risk a relationship I was willing to risk being liked over doing what was best for the client and go into absolute ambiguity, right? The thing about being a coach is you got to love stepping off that precipice into the unknown, because anything can come out of their mouth. I mean, it can be some wild stuff that comes out of their mouth, and you got to be willing to step into that unknown.
One of the things that, one of the things that I think is so interesting about what we do is that we practice what we preach, and there's been times that I've said to a dental assistant or a hygienist, and I've said, we're not going to give you a script, because the way we want you to come at it is through the fact that you care about the patient. And that's how we have to approach our jobs, is as long as we are coming from a good place and from the right place, then we don't ever have to walk away and say, I did something wrong, if we lose a client, or if we can be confident in the fact that what we're saying is not condescending or ugly. We truly are just trying to find out what's going on.
Agreed. But the other thing, totally agree. The other thing that we have to always be cognizant of is that, let me reframe that. One of the best questions I ever got, the challenging questions I got, is what makes you think that you can coach in multiple industries? And I said, that's the beauty of it. I don't have to know multiple industries. And the person said, what are you talking about? I said, I don't. I know that my clients know their business and their industry. What I have to know is people. And I have to have a very wide every different, and then I can do what I've got to do. Better question. Sorry about that, guys. I'm in a.
Are you guys still there?
Yeah, I am. I think we've lost Carrie.
You were being very still, so I didn't know if I was lost.
Yeah, I think she's talking. We just can't hear.
I'm sorry. I can hear.
The thing that's, you say that you're genuinely curious. It astounds me when we get resistance, because we're teaching things that have not only been proven, in dental offices over the last 32 years, but they've spent 32 years working on. We know that this is the best way to do it. Listen to us. Of course, we don't say it like that, but.
Right. Man, I've got a lot to think about. I've got a lot to think about. It's nothing that I didn't already know. I don't think, but I'm becoming more aware of where some opportunities for me to develop as a coach are. I know that structurally and strategically, I need to make some adjustments as a CEO in order to continue to scale and continue to develop our business and grow our business here in the Southeast. But in terms of my delivery of the service itself, you've helped me recognize some opportunities where I can refine and polish.
That's the best part about these conversations. I was thinking the exact same thing.
So, Jocelyn, you know what you get to look forward to.
I'm still in that point where I'm learning anything that I can through anything that I hear.
Yeah, I tell you what's interesting. It's just looking at my evolution in my coaching career over the last 11, 12 years. Very early on, a lot of the clients that I was successful in signing and bringing on board and was able to get some results with were the ones that responded better to the direction. Right? It's kind of like it's easier to develop the consulting skill than it is the coaching skill. Okay. But the consulting skill is only going to take you so far. Like sure. Being able to tell them what to do, that's only going to get you so far. It's only going to get so much growth. It's only going to take that relationship so far. The coaching part is far more difficult to develop. The coaching skill is far, far more difficult, far more complex and convoluted. But right. That's what gets you the last 10%. Right.
Well, and that's what, yeah. I mean, but isn't that where you see the real step change? Like really, when we empower the client, that's where it comes in.
And it's almost as if, as I've evolved in my career, the offices that I have brought. Now, most of my clients have been with me for many years, but most of the clients that I have onboarded in the latter years seem to be more advanced, more developed practices. They're more polished, more buttoned up. They're doing 2.5, 3 million, multiple providers, 5, 6 hygienists. You know what I mean? Not the one doctor, one hygienist, one assistant, one admin, and they're just trying to figure out how to keep their schedule from falling apart. Right. These offices are far more advanced, much further down the train track, and the problems that they run into aren't systems and tasks and activities and knowing what to do. The issues that they tend to run into more are, I would say, communication, leadership development, and just getting people aligned behind a common objective, which is where coaching shines.
Right. Right. And there's what you're highlighting too is, and one of the things that I'm personally challenged by is I always want every one of my practices to be, that pinnacle practice where they're all about continued development and that it's not only a numbers game, but it's also that how do we show up as better humans and living to this vision and this, that. The challenge is that that's not what all of my clients want. Some of my clients just want us to drop in, fix an issue, and move on. Yeah. And they don't have big aspirations. They don't have these big visions. Where they're at today is enough. And so they're just looking for, quick hit or a little brush up or a little polish up, and they don't want to go next level. And so that's a real interesting dynamic too, when you actually want more for your clients than they do. And that's a balancing act. That's something I'm always challenged by.
I learned that one a few years ago. I had a client come up to me and she was like, I feel terrible. And I'm like, what's wrong? And she said, well, I'll hear you tell stories and stuff and talk about how, this practice grew 30%. This practice doubled. This practice went from $1 million, to 3 million, and she's like, we're still doing the same $55,000 a month every month that we've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years. I'm like, listen, it's your goal, not mine. Right? Like if you only want to do $60,000 a month every month, and that's what makes you happy, then that's the goal. Let's do that. But if you want to go from $55,000, $60,000 a month to $125,000, $130,000 a month, then some things are going to have to change. So it was interesting that I got that response, because I'm like, I kind of measure my performance and my success based on the result that shows up. If your practice if you weren't up 18, 19, 20%, I'm like, well, that sucks. If you only grew 6, 7, 8% last year, I'm like, well, I view that as a failure. I'm like, well, that's horrible.
Well, I'll tell you the other, I'll tell you the other side of that, Jon. One of my favorite stories is when I was on a coaching call with you, and it was a team call, and they said, all of them, several of them said, everything is so great here. Things have never been like this before. We are so happy. We love coming into work now. Mm-hmm. That's a huge success.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I got a card from a client. It's on my refrigerator. I got a card from a client in the mail like a week ago or something like that. And he was just talking about how great it's been and how happy he is and how much he looks forward to our relationship and just all that kind of stuff. And that makes you feel really good to get that kind of stuff. And I wish that stuff hit the same for me as 47% growth in collections year over year.
Well, it's not gonna. You're a numbers guy.
I know. It drives me nuts that I can't see it that way. That's certainly a weakness of mine.
I get, when I get those cards, it lights me up. I'm absolutely just so excited. And one of the things that I've found is that, and it's the weirdest thing to me, right? I can help a client deliver bigger and bigger numbers every year and help them grow their business, expand, that sort of thing, meet their numbers. And I never figured out, like when they get pretty big, they're like, okay, we're going to try this on our own. And I'm like, what? But the ones I'm like, what? And we're grateful, but we've got this now. And I know in my heart, one thing I learned when I went to, like, they have to jump out of the nest, they have to go and do it on their own. They can come back and brush up or retool or take it to the next level, but they have to be able to fly with the coaching that you've provided. I get it. But it's always, those are always a surprise to me. And then what I realized was that the people who don't leave are the people who send those cards, mm-hmm. who are so deeply grateful for the non-measurable impact kind of that you're making in the practice, right? That understand that the numbers are only a reflection of the steps that they've made in communication, leadership, development, support, that stuff. Those are the ones that stay. Those are the folks that don't shake loose, because they know that there's always more room for growth there. That work is never done. They get it. And they're also the ones that are willing to be vulnerable, right? They're the ones that are willing to go, ooh, I bet I've got more room for growth here.
Right.
It's like, what was it? I don't know where I got this quote from, but it was something I found when I was, doing some research and brushing up on raise your game for AP. And it said, average players want to hear how good they are. Great players want to hear how they can get better. And it just
right.
kind of helped put things in perspective for me. And this is another thing that I hate about myself is like, I know when I do something good, right? And it almost makes me uncomfortable when people acknowledge me and say, "Oh, great job, Jon. It's so fantastic, amazing, phenomenal, blah, blah, blah." It almost makes me uncomfortable when I get compliments, but there is this thing somewhere that almost expects it sometimes. And it's kind of like hanging in there, kind of waiting for it. Like, oh yeah, they're probably going to say something about this, or they're probably going to say something about this. And I want to completely eradicate that from my psychology. That I don't want that in there at all. Like I want to know where I'm deficient. I want to know where my weaknesses are. Like I don't want to be good at what I do. I don't want to be great at what I do. I don't want to be one of the best at what I do. I want to be the best. I want to be the foremost sought after authority in strategic advice in this industry, bar none. The foremost sought after authority on or speaker in the industry, foremost sought after author in the industry. You know what I mean? And it's like, how do I identify more of those areas of opportunity and refine them and accelerate the refinement process?
So you see where your conflict's coming then, right?
I not at all. So educate me.
Oh, no. I mean, you said you want to be the authority on the strategist and all of that. But what you didn't highlight was that you want to have the deepest relationships with your clients, that you want to have the things that you identified are what you are. The things that you identified are what you are.
Yeah, bad choice of language. I don't mean authority like I'm the person that tells people what to do. I mean authority as
sought after strategist.
Yeah, I'm a sought after individual in this field.
Right. Oh, but you are that.
I think I caught what you. I think I just picked up what you laid down there.
Okay.
Yeah, my intention self-serving.
Well, your intention is in conflict with the skill set and the muscle that you want to build. So you're doing leg day but when you need work on the upper body.
Oh, you don't ever do that.
Right?
Excellent analogy.
Interesting. Okay.
So when I go into really tough strategic conversations, which is all numbers, I call you because while I want to be good enough at it, that's really not, it's not my long-term play, right? My long-term play is around inspiration. So I surround myself with people that inspire differently, that sort of thing. I work on my speaking. I work on my becoming more persuasive, things like that, maybe.
So what? Go ahead.
That requires me to be able to or willing to let go of those things that, while I could get better at that, would take a phenomenal amount of focus outside of my core gifts.
So what's the answer for me? Do I just say, okay, Jon, you're just not a good people person. That's not your skill set. That's not your forte.
That's not true either. It's not true either.
I don't necessarily, there are people that are far more skilled in that area than I am.
Okay.
Like if I had a choice between going and hanging out with 20 people and just socializing, or doing a practice evaluation and finding out how much that practice can grow over the next 12 months, you know which one I'm going to pick.
I do.
Totally.
Count on you for it.
So is the answer, say, okay, Jon, this is not your particular skill set. It is what it is. It's okay. Nothing wrong with it. Not right or wrong, good or bad. Okay. But in order to grow your business, you need that skill set. So do I just surround myself with a bunch of Carries and Sams and Jocelyn's and Reagans, people who are people who have that skill set? And do I just take a step back and say, hey, listen, I'm here to crunch numbers if you need me? You know what I mean?
Well, isn't there a happy medium there?
Right.
Probably.
Isn't there
Probably.
Like, I don't give up doing numbers. I still push myself to do it. And then I send it your way. And then I'm like, where's my gap? What's wrong? What's right? What's my lever? You know what I mean? It's not, so I don't quit trying to be even better at it or better at it. But I also know that if it's really hard, like beyond me or beyond my level of interest in developing to the point where I would be really good at it, I'm going to tap those people that I know that are more objective and have a different belief system around that work.
Mm-hmm.
Because that ultimately is going to give the client a better outcome, and it's going to make me happier.
Yeah. And sure. I've had multiple people seek me out specifically because of that skill set. Like they've heard that I'm really good at this kind of stuff, and they're like, that's the kind of stuff I need.
Right.
So I do think so. Yeah. I think
the better question is, why do you feel like, yeah.
So I think the answer is, continue to be good at what you're good at. Continue to surround yourself with people who have strengths in areas that you don't. And continue to develop the areas where you're not as strong.
Which is exactly what we would coach our doctors on, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So where do you get that information? Like, what if I recognize that my ability to connect with people, like there are some people I connect really well with, like there are a handful of, attorneys, reps, accountants that just for whatever reason, we hit it off, and, conversation is easy. But other people I'm like, it's like a fish out of water. It's like, well, what do you talk about? What it say? How do I start the conversation? I'm serious. It's like a sickness. It's like a disease. Like for example, if I go into a Patterson branch and I present, an hour-long topic, after it's over, unless they're asking me like business number related questions, I'm like, what do we talk about? I don't know. I'm just kind of standing there, and I'm hoping that, you or Jocelyn or somebody will like go shake hands and hold babies and do the whole thing. And I'll just stand in the corner until the thing's over. It's like, I'm so awkward when it comes to that stuff.
Jocelyn, what do you do? What would you say
about Jon and what he should do?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I was gonna bring up the book I was reading again. That I don't know if you guys have looked at it, but that Super Bowl talks about how to be charismatic, and how to be comfortable going into to a room and never worrying about stepping over your words and never worrying about whether or not you're going to have something to talk about. I haven't gotten that far into it. But I mean, I think practice sticking yourself in social situations and getting out of your comfort zone. And two, just, reading but see, like you said today about what Carrie was saying, you knew, but sometimes it just kind of has to hit you in the face.
Yeah.
I think there's a third, I'm going to tag a third onto it. Some saying in that the trick is just to get curious about others. So
it's a great point.
Yeah.
The thing that I always do, and if I'm honest, I developed the skill set because of my fear of judgment, right? So I was so afraid of being judged and found lacking that I found that if I got curious about other people, that there's a lot, they would ask me less questions, thereby sparing me the possibility of being judged and being found lacking. So what I did is I just would start asking, so, hey, what about, I remember in college, I would ask ridiculous questions. Like, is that bartender any good? Everybody's got an opinion, right? Or do you like the band? Everybody's got an opinion. And from there, I just graduated to, like, if I'm standing at a Patterson branch, I'd be like, okay, what part of that didn't make any sense at all? Or what part of that do you think you can use? Or who's your most challenging client? And what do they say that, sets your teeth? Or I just start asking them questions. And what I found then is that all the focus, all the spotlight is off of me, and people feel like you deeply care about them. If they're good questions. Same.
I'm exactly the same way.
Yeah. I don't know where I picked that up, but you just reminded me the curiosity component, just being incredibly, incredibly curious.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
And honestly, randomness is so disarming, right? So I remember the first time I had to walk up to the CFO of the company. I was working at a home building company. I had to walk up to the CFO, and I was tripping and stuttering and stammering. Like, as I'm walking down the hall in my head, it's a hot mess. I got up there and he's looking down at my feet, and I'm like, crap. And so what I said is, what, you hate my shoes or what? And he looked up at me and he just started to laugh. And he's like, Cahill, I do not know what to make of you. And I'm like, I was like, okay, well, that's good. Because my second one is, I want $5,000 or whatever for this or that, But the whole disarming thing, that random curiosity changes everything.
Changes their state.
Yes.
If they're fighting you, it'll totally change their state.
Exactly. The more random you can get in an office, I think that's the mistake I made with my team that likes to live in misery, is that I've been so trying to help them that I haven't really disarmed it. Now that you say that, I'm like, hey, shoemaker, get your kids some shoes.
Yeah, and to come full circle on that whole situation, what I learned was, and this hit me in the face. What I learned is like, back to Patrick Lencioni's book, if there's a lack of participation and contribution, that means there's a lack of trust somewhere in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I asked for feedback, and I matter of fact, in our last consult, I acknowledged that. I said, listen, help me understand. This is what I see. Is there something here that needs to be addressed? And everybody's like, oh, no, nothing. Everything's great. I was like, okay. And we'll take your word for it, because this is what the symptoms are. This is what the symptoms mean. And so part of my responsibility is identifying that and addressing it. Well, it's for what I learned is it wasn't a lack of trust within the team. It was a lack of trust of me. There isn't a lack of trust within the team and the environment itself. It's and even though I can look at my past behavior and communication and say, and I can be like, well, what in the heck did I ever do? Right? What, you know what I mean? Like, what?
Yeah. Totally.
I'm
I get it.
completely ignorant. Doesn't mean that just the fact that I'm ignorant doesn't mean that I've earned their trust.
I think there's an innate distrust of consultants because the experience that I've heard is that they just get more and more work.
Agreed.
And we give them more work in the beginning, but it evolves into just kind of doing their work differently and more efficiently, and so it ends up being easier for them.
I would agree with that. And I think sometimes that stems from really not knowing who we are. Like, I have had to make a conscious effort to share a little bit more about, to get more vulnerable, not just to share, but to share from a place of vulnerability a little bit, which is excruciating. But I'm asking them to get vulnerable, and I keep all my cards close to the vest. That's not a place to build trust, right? So it's not easy. Now, it's important to not overshare because it's not their therapy session, right. But it's something that I've really been working on as well. Because
I feel like I do really good with that part. I feel like I do really good. And both of you have heard me present. I mean, I use myself as an example.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like I do. I could be wrong. I feel like I'm very transparent and very vulnerable and very open. But there's maybe it's the way that maybe just giving them the information saying, okay, this is what happened. That in and of itself is not enough to be defined as vulnerable. There's another dynamic missing. Maybe it's the way that I present it. Reagan's brought that to my attention in the past because she said something like, when I presented the communication tools, it was very matter of fact. It was like very objective, very dry, very matter of fact. Here it is, right? Which that works. Right. Talking about dental insurance management,
reality check,
negotiating reimbursements, that works. But when you're talking about something like communication or leadership development or, the 6 human needs or utilizing emotions or emotional maturity and intelligence, that doesn't hit right. So maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's not what I'm saying. Maybe it's how I'm saying it, which is hard because I'm like, well, how do I say it different?
I tell you where I saw you get super vulnerable, that it hit me was at the Murfreesboro seminar. Mm-hmm. You were talking about your dad and your brother, and you got, I don't know, it was different. You didn't really get emotional, but you're right. It was the way you were presenting it. Cause I felt that, if you can think back to how you were, or how you usually talk about that.
Talking about where my limiting belief came from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that's helped too, I think, is that getting one-on-one with folks. So if you have a team that's struggling with trust, pick the ones that trust you least and sit down and have a conversation with them. I think I need to do that more myself, but I know that that's helped with one of my teams build more core trust. But, if we really are a coach, we can do group coaching, but very often coaching also needs to be a one-on-one thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Y'all give me a lot to think about. Now I just feel like I've been put through the ringer, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm starting.
We still think you're amazing.
Yeah. I think that Well, the beautiful thing about this conversation is that I take away so much too. You know what I mean? There's so much that I can use from this conversation to think about and to ponder into how do I implement or how do I execute on that. And right now I'm thinking about that client. I'm thinking, man, I need to use that 5 dysfunctions of a team, that concept around trust with that team, big time. It's a great insight.
Yeah. I think to become, to master coaching, you have to master being coached.
Yes.
Like that's where it starts. Like you don't truly understand how to effectively coach another human being unless you truly understand what it feels like to be coached. Like true coaching. I know like sports in high school and college and that kind of stuff. It's a great example, great metaphor. And I think Remember the Titans is probably the greatest movie ever created. Because there's so much just really good stuff built in to that. Hang on just a second. Sorry. I got to figure this out before the next one. Built into that script or whatever you call it. And you see a lot of personal struggle throughout that movie, on the upper levels and the lower levels. But it becomes more. I think that the further you get down that road, and I would probably say that coaching precedes leadership. I mean, real leadership. Because real leadership isn't something that's handed to you. Like you can have authority and be considered a leader because you're the boss or you're the manager. They have to follow you. They don't have a choice. Right. And you've got the different types of leadership. Okay. I think it's John C. Maxwell walks through those, if I'm not mistaken. But like the most authentic form of leadership is like leadership by inspiration. Like people are inspired to follow you because of who you are.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I think that's the pinnacle that John C. Maxwell talks about on the 5 levels of leadership. It's like getting to the pinnacle. And now people don't follow you because of what you've done. They don't follow you because of what you've done for them or the organization or what you can do. They follow you because of who you are. And that's like it's in his book, it's called The Pinnacle. But I think in order to get to that point, I don't think you can get to that point without being coachable, without being coached.
Truth. And the number one thing you have to be coached, we all have to be coached on as coaches is who do we want to be?
Yeah.
How do we want to show up?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, y'all given me a lot to think about. That's kind of my objective. 2022. I'm trying to put in place like the steps that I'm going to take. I forgot about that business plan that we've got to submit to corporate. I'll have to do that tonight. But a lot of it's been inspired by the 5 levels of leadership that John C. Maxwell did. And getting to a place where I can achieve the reproduction level, where I can achieve the same results that I'm achieving now, but rather than me achieving them directly, achieving them indirectly through other people. And that brings you one step up the ladder, and ultimately you want to get to the very top. But yeah, that's certainly gonna require some uncomfortable decisions for the coming year. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll be good. But you've definitely highlighted some glaring weaknesses for me.
Oh,
We're so glad to help, Jon. Just let us know the next time you need
that. You're funny. You're funny.
Carrie, did you make
this was a great.
Yeah.
I did. I just pulled in the driveway just now.
Very good. Very good.
So I'm home safe and sound.
Jocelyn, we've got camp communication in Knoxville next week.
Yes.
And
I got to go, guys. Sorry. Bye.
Carrie, no problem. Talk to you later.
Bye, Carrie.
We've got a couple of teams from Greenville coming. I know Dean's team's coming.
Good.
And then didn't we have I can't remember his name.
Williams.
Yeah. He's got 2 locations. Both of them are coming, or some of them.
I assume he's going to bring all of them, but I need to ask Brittany for a list of who's registered. Or okay. Jessica.
Yeah, Brittany or Knoxville, so it would be Jessica. But I can check it. It's on Constant Contact.
And I talked to I think Hope's going to be there. And I talked to, or I left messages for a couple other reps today to give me a call back.
Very good. Yeah, I hope they can make it. I think especially that camp, more so than any other one.
Yes,
I think that's probably a very impactful one. I think that camp really represents, Fortune well. And it kind of really lets them know who we are, what we're about, what makes us different, all that good stuff.
I agree.
But it looks like we've got 12 registered as of right now. And that's all Dean.
Is more not coming?
No, I don't believe so. But yeah, it doesn't look like anybody from Williams is registered yet.
She went all the way to Murfreesboro, but she's not going to come to Knoxville.
Right. Well, they just recently did that camp too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that would make a lot of sense. But nonetheless, we'll have those 12, and hopefully we can get Williams and some of his folks in there. Something told me for some reason it was in my head that they were coming.
They said they were coming.
Okay. Maybe that was it.
Do you want me to stop in Bradley White's office and just say, hey, just dropping off this flyer?
Certainly can.
Do you think it would help?
Certainly can. I've got well, it's logged me out. I was going to look at my schedule because I think I'm in his office. Not next week. Actually, I know that they won't be there because they work on Fridays. They're off Wednesdays and work on Fridays.
Oh.
So if he's not registered, that means they've got a full day of patients.
Okay.
But nonetheless, yeah, let's follow up with Greenville.
And I followed up with that office in Asheville as well and haven't gotten a response yet.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, I'm going to let you get on with the rest of your night. Thought it was a great conversation. And I'll get this sent over to our editing company, get it up on YouTube here pretty quick, but should be about a week or two before it launches.
Cool. Thanks for including me.
You're very welcome. Then maybe next one we'll have a few more people on here and people don't have to listen to me the whole time. Have a good evening. Tell David I said hi. And I will talk to you soon.
I will. Tell Brittany I said hello.
All right, I sure will.
Thanks.
All right, see ya.
Bye, Jon.